I'm straight up getting calls from my friends. I had no idea about the podcast, and they're coming at me like Nikki coming at Sam in Casino.
And what the are you doing on TV anyhow? You know, I get calls from back home every day. They think you went bad.
I mean, honestly, I kind of agree with them. We're very excited to have Ava Berkofsky on the show today. Ava's an amazing cinematographer that has done incredible work on the HBO series Insecure. She got nominated for an Emmy for her work on that series, and honestly, we're very excited to have her on the show. And we were fortunate to work with Ava recently on a project that I'm not going to talk about just yet, but you guys will see it soon enough. We actually got a release date, by the way. It's going to be in the beginning of June, so I'm super excited about that.
Oh, great. I can't wait.
Yeah, because of everything with the with obviously the pandemic, they like held, some campaigns got held back, but we're excited to share that with everyone soon. But Ava did an amazing job. Truth be told, is when when the agency that reached out to us requested her, I didn't think we'd be able to get her on the shoot. And luckily, we were able to swing it, and we're super appreciative to have you, obviously doing it with us. But tell us a little bit, tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, I think what's really interesting is I heard, or I had read that by your family, you come from a photography family.
Yeah, I do. My sister is a photographer. I have my half sister, my sister, my dad, and my granddad are all photographers, and then my other sister is a development writer. So yeah, but photography is like in our blood. I grew up in a dark room in our basement, and that's just always been how I find peace, and how I see the world, how I deal with the world.
Nice. And was it natural for you early on? Like, did you gravitate towards that art form? Was it just something that just was completely natural for you?
Yeah, it was. It was completely natural, and I don't know if that's because I grew up around cameras, and that my sister and my dad and my family was all immersed. But I got my first kind of like fully manual 35 millimeter camera when I was like 13. And I just like had this realization that you could create a whole universe inside of that doesn't exist yet inside of a camera. And it's like, that just blew my mind. And I've just been playing with that idea like ever since.
That's awesome. Yeah, there's something about like that inception moment, especially when you're young, where you gravitate towards something, or you discover something that you realize has like endless potential. Like, I remember you hear a lot of artists talk about like that moment. It's funny, like the person that I always feel like talks about it so like philosophically is Pharrell. Like, talks about like how music was just like this spaceship that did like all, every time he talks about it, it's such an eloquent way to describe it.
Interesting. I've never heard him say that, but like, yeah, totally. You get on a spaceship and you can go all over the world. I mean, all the worlds, I guess.
And so, I guess how did a lot of directors of photography start with like a photography background, or always photography's always been an interest, just because it's a more accessible way to explore the world than carrying like a larger camera and stuff. So what was that transition? Like, when did the film thing start coming into play?
Yeah, I mean, so I never thought, and this is sort of like, product of my age and the world, and like I just didn't think that like women could be DPs. I just was like, I could see what that looked like, and I was like, oh, I can't do that. Like, that's not for me. So and that was not even fully conscious. I just sort of like, I didn't let myself have that dream. And I went to school for
Which is crazy, right? Like, it's kind of crazy. Like, it's
it,
not crazy for you in the moment to have that realization, but in general, that's just a crazy mindset that we have, or we had at times as a society.
yeah, it's really sad. I mean, it really cuts you off from yourself. And I think like a lot of like, I think, women, people of color, a lot of us do that to ourselves without realizing it. And it's like, I didn't realize it until much later that I was like, this has been my dream forever. And I just couldn't admit it because like, I don't know, it's just, it's a boys club. It's a man's club. Like, li- I'm just like, I, I didn't see where I could fit in a as the boss, because you're the boss. You have to have respect from your crew, for your crew, and people, and you need to have a vast amount of technical knowledge and creative knowledge. And I just was like, it was the social part of it. I didn't think I could get beyond, and it wasn't conscious. But at some point, like I was really like deep into my photography work, and I was doing documentary photography. And a friend of mine was shooting a documentary. It was like kind of an arty music documentary. And his DP's wife went into labor. Like the day they were supposed to like go out and shoot this thing for a week, she was like a month early. And he was like, you just do it. Just come with me, shoot it the way you shoot your photographs. You're a technical person. You can figure out the camera. It was digital. Like you can figure it out. And I was like, okay, I can figure it out. And I swear to God, like literally 2 days into shooting that, I was like, this is it. I'm never going back. And
What was the aesthetic? That's funny. I thought about this question like yesterday when we were talking. Like, what was the aesthetic of that project? Because I would imagine, like, if you going into it with like, like a handheld aesthetic or moving the camera as if it was, obviously it wasn't Steadicam, but like, did you find was that project a lot more static in nature because of your photography, vision, like eye?
100%. And honestly, I still have to be like, move the camera, like moving images, like I've gotten a lot better at it, and it's like a whole new world. But that first project, and luckily it fit the aesthetic and it fit with the director, and it was like the director and I were in a band together, and so we knew each other really well. But yeah, I was like, there's the camera, and do you like it? Here we are, we're done, but it was also like just sort of, it was such a joy to use the like observational eye that I use in documentary photography in a more alive, collaborative way. It was so
A lot of the composition for your shots to me lend itself um like photojournalism, like even stuff that you would see like the New York Times photographers do, where you have like for lack of a better example, like a homeless person sitting on the bottom right hand corner, and then all of this empty space of like a concrete wall around them. Like the aesthetic doesn't follow a lot of the traditional norms of filmmaking, that not that there is a right and a wrong, but there's certain aesthetics that we follow. But that was something that stood out with your work. Like just the framing felt like it was influenced by like documentary photography.
Well, yeah, I mean, like my main influences are documentary photography and even fine art photography, and that's for sort of like the heart and soul of things. And then I have influences for like lighting and certain ways of managing the camera. But yeah, no, when I am looking for inspiration, it's still photographs that I look at.
Yeah, yeah. For me, like black and white photography is hypnotizing, like completely hypnotizing. That's why I said the comment about if when the day I retire, I just want to walk in the Leica store and get like a monochromatic camera and just shoot with that thing. And it's crazy. Like Scorsese is my favorite filmmaker. I always tell this to people. Like I just love all his films, and people are super shocked to hear that. Like my favorite film is Raging Bull, and I still love like all the other ones, but Raging Bull, like that opening title sequence, and that thing just hypnotizes me completely.
It's
And I
a
don't know if you know this, like Michael Chapman was like literally all those chairs were blanketed, and he was like running around and then like doing like a flash strobe and then running around and then doing another one to create all of the strobes going off in the crowd.
That's amazing.
Um, but yeah, that film's beautiful.
That's an amazing sequence, and that's an amazing movie. I'm not surprised. I feel like I should rewatch it though. It's been a while.
But so I guess from there. so you come back, you have that experience on that project, and then you're like, all right, I want to do film. Now what?
Yeah, literally. And I was like, okay, who wants to hire me? And it's a long process, and it was like, uh, digital was happening. So there was more democratization of the field, but um, it was, I couldn't get anyone to hire me, and I knew I needed more experience. And so what kind of happened is, like, my other interests in, like, social justice merged with, like, my technical side and then my photography side, and I started working at a production company that only did sort of social issue documentaries. And I became a I became a producer for a minute, and I was terrible at it, and I kind of hated it, and I just wanted the camera. And I sort of weaseled my way into getting the camera, and losing the title of producer, associate producer. And um yeah, and then since then it's just been like a slog, and having to really believe in myself and push and push and push and push. Um and yeah, I don't know how it happened, but it was a lot of pushing and luck. And um yeah, like, I tell myself a lot of the time when I'm like, oh no, I can't do that, uh is like the quote, like, 99% of getting what you want is showing up. And so it's like, even when you don't think you can, just trying anyway.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's, for me personally, that's been the biggest hurdle is once, the idea of conquering fear. And I know, like, I was referencing a little ago, like, there's a reason why I gravitate towards, um, Jimmy Iovine. He has like so many of these great one-liners when he was talking about, the crossroads of business and the music industry. And he talks about like fear a lot. And he's like, the biggest breakthrough you'll have as a professional is when you start using fear as a tailwind instead of a headwind. And I always love that because, like, if you work in film, me and Ari joke about it all the time, every single it's very, I mean, I don't know, at least for me, it's very hard to have an ego in this business because you're humbled every day. Like, just when you think your shit doesn't stink, like, you get humbled, like, you just get knocked over the head. Like, it's just every single project is another mountain.
Yeah, it's totally true. And there's a new client, or for me, there's a new director, a new producer. And yeah, I, it every time it's like learning. It's like learning from zero. And you realize after a while that it's not zero that you're coming from, but it's like rebuilding a car a different way every single time, because it's not going to work again the same way. And if it does, then you get bored and gimmicky, and it's not, I don't know, you're not growing, and that's like the opposite of the point.
You went to, I know you went to AFI, and then from what I noticed, it's that you worked in documentary filmmaking for quite some time after that. And I guess take me through that, and then really, it's funny for me. I don't have much interest. Like, I just love documentary filmmaking. Like, that's where my passion lies. I know that, but I know a lot of DPs, documentary filmmaking is so accessible to us early on in our careers, and it's something that we can excel at. And then there's like that transition for some that want to go um, uh, to like fiction based stuff and things like that. So I guess tell me through like that, walk me through that whole kind of chapter of your life.
Yeah, so I mean, what I did was I worked in documentaries for a long time, in documentary film shooting for a long time. And then there came this moment when my rate was like, kind of at the top of what someone in that field is going to get. And I was just like getting bored. And in my heart, I knew what I really wanted, and I just still hadn't admitted it to myself. So I had this moment. I was actually watching a film that was shot by Roger Deakins, and I was like, you know what? I want to have the chops to do that. I want to at least have the chops to do that. And I know I don't have them, and that's what I really want. And so I made this decision, in my 30s, in my early 30s, to go to AFI, and it was kind of crazy because I don't have any money, and it was this crazy risk to take financially. But I was like, if I get hit by a bus and I don't even try, then I'm, that's not the way to live. The thing was is that I tried so hard to make the jump over, but I like from documentary to fiction. But number one, I didn't have the chops technically, and I knew that, but I think if I was like a cocky man, I wouldn't have cared. But I knew in my heart that like I didn't want to learn on the job, and that's something that I've gotten over now. I'm cool to learn on the job all the time, but I
that
think
that was my that was one of my biggest breakthroughs as a DP, is like realizing there's so much technical, like at least for me, I realized two things. I'm like, okay, I know the camera and I know how to make the camera move. That's my strength within that art form. But when it comes to like lighting 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 and the lighting tools and the lighting setups and things like that, like I just didn't know what I was really doing, but I knew the look I was going for. So I got comfortable. I remember somebody giving me the best piece of advice, which is like, don't worry about everything. Just worry about the one person that's above you and one person that's under you, like in the hierarchy of like learning, or the team around you, and just communicate to those 5 or 6 people and ignore the 100 people that are here. And I know that is the easiest way to get somebody to not be overwhelmed when they're in that environment.
yeah.
And you had mentioned, like, and other things I've seen, like the importance of a team. And I feel like once you have like a gaffer that understands, like, that's how you like to communicate, it really makes it a lot easier, because you could show him a photo and be like, this is the look. And then like, I don't really care what light he sets up, unless I'm like really specific about something. But I
Right.
love just like, leaning on them for their advice.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like uh super if you can find those people, then that's just bliss. And for me, it's been hard to find that person, especially in the gaffer position. I have a key grip who I just like, we're true collaborators, and it took him, we did a season of television together, and by the end we were like mind melded. He shapes light before I even ask him to. And but with gaffers, I've had a couple that it's just like it's never quite right, or I had one I loved and then he moved, and it's hard. So what I've learned with lighting is that for me, because I've been in situations where I just get screwed if the gaffer is not listening to me, or is not understanding where I'm coming from. I I can do it all myself if I have to, and ideally I won't have to. I do, because I have a lot of other things to think about. Like you said, like dealing with the people directly who have their teams, and trusting them. Um, but for me, yeah, and I think for a lot of documentary DPs, coming like the challenge of lighting is this thing, because you don't get to practice in documentary work, or you don't get the tools to play around. But like you said, knowing what you want and being able to have references, going into a job having references, hiring the right person to be your gaffer. If you're lucky, I feel like you can get that person to do what you want creatively. But I find that a lot of people have just different tastes, and different. You're like, I don't know. I'm really, really picky, and so if someone does something that's like a bad approximation of what I'm talking about, I'm like, okay, let's do this again. And yeah, funnily enough, like the job that I did with you guys in New York, none of my regular crew were able to do it with me because it was really short, and other reasons. It but these random guys who weren't even in the union, and they're just like young guys, they were amazing. They were totally amazing. Like, they just picked up my brain and then they like ran with it. It was really fun.
Yeah, I find there's like a whole generation of young, young guys that unfortunately like the idea of an apprenticeship has kind of like fallen by the wayside a little bit. Like people are just kind of learning on their own. And
Mhm.
some of these young guys that are coming up are really, it's inspiring to see them like they dedicate their lives, like they really, really want to like learn this stuff, and they do research on their own and they experiment, and
Yeah.
it's a really special thing that we're seeing from a whole new generation of like filmmakers.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I was really impressed with how young they were and how much they knew. And also we were shooting on film and I was really impressed with the fact that they could understand contrast ratios and like, underexposure, overexposure for on film because it's one thing on digital and then it's a different thing on film. And I was just like, "How old are you? You're like 22 and you know how to do this? How?" But I think that they just sort of practiced in their minds a lot. They played around with their friends. I think one of them went to film school. And yeah, it's just like dedicating themselves to learning about this. And it worked. And I was thrilled. It's like that's another reason I love that job. It was like, none of those people, I've never worked with Merge before. And then your producer, Melanie, was like, just such had so much excitement for the job and the director did and the crew did, and it was like I haven't done something in that vein of like documentary but like branded in so long that it was just like such a joy to get my hands dirty in that way.
That's awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. That's awesome to hear. Yeah, that's definitely something like if there's any compliment that we like kind of strive for legit is that feeling, like that magical feeling of set, like that people feel that energy.
Mhm.
Definitely something that we really pride ourselves, because it's just kind of like this is supposed to be fun. Like that's what we always say. Like there's no reason why any of this shouldn't be anything but fun. Like our jobs are um a blast in comparison to 99% of other professions out there. At
Yeah.
least the way I feel about it. But
Yeah.
but let me ask you, like, so going from the photography over to film, like again, the beautiful thing about film is like all of these lens choices that we have, all of these different ways of expressing ourselves, all these different aspect ratios. Like, not to say that photography doesn't have that, but film just has, it feels like a larger spectrum. And
Oh,
so, like, what tell me about, like, because again, seeing like an example is when you use the anamorphic lenses and compressed it to a 2.0 to create that sense of I guess suffocation for that character, like that, like honed in there. I guess talk to me a little bit about lenses and kind of how you philosophically view or
right.
approach them.
Well, I mean, what you're saying is a really big difference between photography and cinematography. I agree with you because it's there are so many different sets of lenses and they started in the 40s and 30s that are still around up to like now where everything is so pristine and clean and made for these very large sensors. And it's just like picking a paintbrush and kind of even like picking the paint, maybe the camera's the paint, I don't know, but it's one of the most important decisions you'll make. And for me, for that film that you're talking about, it's called Share, Share, not Cher. uh, I chose these older anamorphic lenses that were very had a lot of character and they're heavy and they're different sizes. They were not convenient, but they have this character that's just really special. And I tested a lot of different lenses and we knew we wanted to take anamorphic and like cut its legs off so that it felt like stuck. And after a bunch of tests, those were the lenses that just gave you that feeling. And yeah, we made that decision to shoot 2.0 exactly for the reason you mentioned, like the claustrophobia. She's more and more trapped in that film. And yeah, I'm glad we did it. It was not easy because using old lenses on a new camera in a way that's not dictated by either um, made for some technical issues that were kind of hard to deal with, but in the end, like a total joy.
Nice. Yeah, we people are trying to convince me all the time, and the truth is like they want to try and convince me to buy lenses here from Merce, so like we don't have to rent them all the time. But it's like the business decision is probably to get lenses,
Mhm.
but the like I'm just like I don't want to be. I know that if we have lenses here, I'm always gonna gravitate those because of like for budgetary reasons we're always like tight budgets this like want to make it happen whatever. But I don't want to get stuck with having to use the same lens over. I'm like I don't want to put myself in that box because
Mhm.
um so many amazing options out there that I just don't. Again, I don't want to. I want to be able to have options when I'm approaching a project.
I would be the exact same way. Like, because totally the business decision is like, yeah, buy lenses, use them, make your money back. But yeah, there's so many different kinds, and they all have this different personality, and it's kind of like the DNA of the image you're making, you know?
Yeah, like we just got like somebody just got um the Cook anamorphic large format like special flares, and I'm like, oh my god, like it was like I want to shoot with those,
Yeah.
because I just finished watching like Euphoria. They did such a beautiful job on that show, and I was just like, the large format stuff is just it's so interesting. I mean, Joker. Obviously, everyone like at least saw the look of that film. I mean, there's just a lot of like really interesting stuff with like the LF, stuff and all these lenses now. It's just crazy.
Yeah, it's like a whole new world. People are building lenses again, like from scratch again for a different sensor size and retooling the older lenses. Yeah, yeah. I did a show that's about to come out recently on the LF. I love the LF. That camera is the camera for if you have to do large format, which a lot of the streaming platforms dictate now, or they don't dictate the sensor size, they dictate like it has to be true 4K minimum. And the camera, and I love the Alexa. So yeah, the LF is just like, but I use Panavision retooled a set of ultra speeds from the 80s, which are my favorite lenses, uh, into what they call P vintage, but then they had to retool those for the larger sensor. And it's just like you get this, it's like, it's like a constant dialogue. It's like being on a spaceship that can go anywhere.
It's so I need like I think I feel like I talked about this on every episode of the podcast, but I had like this, I needed like a few years ago. I got to a point where I was like, man, I really need a hobby outside of film because I can't. My happiness can't live or die. Like I have my family, but happiness can't live or die only with what happens in my business or this when professionally. So I took on a hobby of wine, and it was a reason to like travel the world, go to these beautiful areas, visit these vineyards. I love the storytelling aspect of wine. I love the production aspect of it because it relates so much to film. Like there's the same process. Um, and to your point, it's like lenses. Like there's just so many different aesthetics and styles and influences from countries and regions and this, and it's like everything just tastes completely different
Yeah,
depending on where you're at. And I always say that for DPs, like lenses are like spices for a chef, and then like the flares are like the sauce. It's just like that like last little sauce that you put on the dish.
totally,
Um,
totally.
but yeah. So let's you moving a little forward, and we'll jump into this. Like so, um, I caught up on some of the the stuff for I watched episodes of season 2 of Insecure, which you shot, and yeah, such a obviously a great show. Now it's doing well, and what was that experience kind of like?
Well, that was interesting because that, like, when you talk about that moment of sort of there's some jumps in your career, right? Like when I went from documentary filmmaking, I was like, you know what, if I want to make a jump, I can't figure out a way to apprentice. Like I wrote to DPs, and I'm going back a little bit, but just because I feel like I didn't finish that point. Um, I wrote to DPs. I tried to get on sets. I wanted to apprentice, and I just couldn't find my way in. And I just made this choice that I was like, I'm gonna go to film school, even though I can't afford it. It doesn't make any sense, but you know what? I'll figure it out. And from there, I I was able to get my first feature right away. Just basically, even it was actually from a contact I already had. It was like not like I don't know. It was just like it's just the way it happened. And then but it was a very small film. And then I did a few other small films. Um, and somehow Melina Matsoukas got my name as part for Insecure, and so I like went in for the interview, and like I said, like I guess they just liked what I did, but it was this big jump from indie filmmaking to being on a set of hundreds of people and a different kind of pressure, but trying to maintain my creative sensibility, which is what got me there in the first place, while while under all that pressure with a crew that was huge. And like, I brought in as many of my own people as possible, but I kind of couldn't. It was like it was a jump big enough that I needed people who had done it a number of times. And actually, you know what, I was able to bring in like 90% of my own people, but I did have to make different like cocktails of people I wasn't used to. It was a big jump. So that was a moment that was not easy for me. Couldn't sleep at night. I was sweating, but the trick was to recommit to my creative vision, because otherwise I'm like, why else would they have me here? Because I'm like a sweating, nervous mess. So eventually I stopped sweating. I got less nervous, and and I'm proud of season 2. It was like Melina was a great collaborator, and we made something I feel proud of.
That's awesome. And yeah, it's again goes back to the idea of the some of the compositions of some of the shot that have like those elements that I was talking about earlier, just the unique framing aspects. I think even in one of the episodes I saw I believe it's was it that? No, it wasn't. I'm sorry. It wasn't that episode. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that I love is you made it a point, and it's funny because I understood exactly what you were talking about, because I had seen like something you had online where you're not, uh there's not there's not an emphasis in film score or anything like that to know how to like properly light African Americans or anyone of like a darker skin tone. It's just not a thing, because and in a weird sort of way, it contradicts a lot of the things that we learned how to light. Like it's about like softening skin and some contrast and stuff, and then certain techniques like that just don't work in that space. So you have to reevaluate the approach. And I think you did a phenomenal job on that series, because even embracing kind of that muted look, but then also the skin tones just look beautiful, and everything felt so natural. And I think that's something that you guys did an amazing job.
No, thank you. I mean, that was one of the reasons I got that job, actually, as well, because the film that I had shot uh, previously had an entirely African American cast and different skin tones, so from like quite light to quite dark, and warm, cool. And I like sort of honed a method in that environment that was pretty easy to translate to a bigger environment. And what I don't understand, like I realized while I was there that I had never, like, at AFI, it's a really big film school. It's like the hardest to get into. It's like the best cinematography school. We didn't have one African American model while I was there. And you know what, to their credit, since this started getting talked about, they've changed that. I've gone in and done some workshops, and I know that they've changed that. They've heard it and they've changed it. But time, which was not that long ago, it was like, I don't know, 2013. They just didn't. It was an afterthought, and I don't. And that was, I just, coming from documentary as well. Like I'd shot in all different communities. Like shooting people of color was not like something that I hadn't done 10 million times in a documentary sense. So I kind of understand the way the light works. And oh, you froze. Oh, you unfroze. Okay. Um, yeah, it's interesting. I think it's historical, political, technical, and emotional. And it just wasn't a question to me that like this is important. But doing that and maintaining my style was not hard. I don't know why, but maybe because I had had some practice, and also it's just like you have an innate sense of light. All DPs do, and mine came out. That's how my mine comes out.
That's awesome. And then going through and again, you dive into, so now all of a sudden, I didn't even know like some of the perspective of like how big that jump was really for you, but you go through this whole thing and it's like, and you get nominated for an Emmy. Like that's got to be like a holy shit moment. Like how did that happen? I mean, I know you're gonna respond in a very humble fashion because I would do the same right now, but that's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that so that first season I like reset the look. That was season 2. I reset the look. I worked really hard on making like the visual rules and the kind of the composition you're talking about. It's like it was like we decided it's always got to be part of the storytelling. We can't just be like doing it for the sake of doing it. Otherwise it's hard to find the logic. And so that kind of got really established in season 2. And yeah, I was in Canada shooting another job, and I was like kind of down. I was like, I miss my family. I miss my home. What am I doing here? I'm tired. I'd been there for months. And I'm like, and then like I'm coming out of the like craft service area, and I'm like, oh, another day, I want to go home. And I get a text from Issa Rae that's like, congratulations. And I was like, huh, what? And then I get more texts, and I was like, what? It just felt surreal, it's like to have people recognize your work, um when you've been working so hard, and then all of a sudden someone's like, here, have like a piece of glittery gold. It's crazy.
That's awesome. Issa did such a great job. I mean, watching her performance in a lot of the episodes, it's really great. And yeah, like it's ironic, like obviously the show, but like, just the insecurities of her character are so like she just does such a great job of embodying that emotion, and that unsureness, is she did a phenomenal job.
She's she's an amazing, like she's really amazing. It's funny because she always talks about herself as a writer, and she is a writer. She writes a lot of the episodes, especially the big ones. And but she's a great actor, and she's great to shoot with. She's so collaborative and giving, and yeah, she impresses me all the time. I always say I have the coolest boss in the world.
Yeah, so like, kind of going through that, I had so an interesting thing that happened recently, and I'm sure I'll tell you a little bit of the story, but we were doing a job we were doing a job in Central Florida, an agency um, from LA. It was actually Designery down in Long Beach, and they said, something happened on set, and the producer, which happened to be a female, the agency producer said, um, "Oh, you guys have a lot of like females on set," and I kind of like look around. I was like, "Oh yeah." Like I just remember the moment being like that, like such a weird question. Like I was like, oh yeah, I guess I didn't even like notice it. And she's like, I'm like, why is that? And I turned to her. I remember my response was like, is that not common in out west or in LA? And she's like, not so much on many of my jobs. And I remember that sticking with me and like really being like, I literally didn't think it was anything weird of it. It wasn't even an intentional decision I made. It was just more of a mentality of like, I don't know who's the best person for the job. That's who I'm putting there. Like, and it was never an intentional thing that I was like trying to diversify my crew or anything. It was just this just happened to be how the talent laid itself out. And it's just interesting to me that that's again still a thing. And we talked about it earlier, but from your perspective, is that something that you feel is changing? Like you seem to be very vocal about that, and you know,
Yeah, I'm vocal about it because it's been such a part of my journey. I've just like had so many experiences where I've been told explicitly or subliminally, like, get out, you don't belong here. And It's changing, and it's changing. And also, I have more stature in the industry now, so people can't. Although they do, like when I'm outside of New York or LA, or Toronto, it's the same. I get the same kind of like angry older man who's like doesn't understand. Like they're like, what's that? No. And it's interesting. Like I I think the industry is diversifying, but I think that it's still like there's still a lot of dinosaurs out there, and hopefully they're all gonna die soon, but like or go out to pasture. Um, and even like younger DPs, there's a mold for a DP, and it's not necessarily female, but that's changing. It's super exciting. But I still, and I know a lot of the younger DPs that I sort of like mentor and talk to feel the same way. It's still, you're expected to stay in a certain lane. You're like, when you assert your authority, it's like you have to figure out how to do it without being a bitch, and like without, oh, I don't want to piss off this guy, but I really need him to do this and it's not good enough. And yeah, so I still see it as a major issue. It still has been for me. Working in LA and New York, much less so. But like I did a job actually in Miami a few years ago, and it was a commercial. So they got me the gaffer. I didn't interview him. I didn't know where he came from. He was just some guy. But he, I asked for my first thing, and he got so angry. I had the nerve to ask for something.
I swear to you, I'm not obviously gonna say anything, but I'm like 99% sure I know who that is. I'm just not even gonna get like, just because it just sounds so in character. The truth is, I'm actually on the contrary. I don't think that that is anywhere near the norm of what the film community is here in Miami. Like, I think we have an awesome film community of people that, because they don't come from that, kind of the traditional industry background, like it's all fresh, and they've gone into it with a very different perspective. With that being said, it's super shitty but funny that I probably know who that is. With that being said, that's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of like what you come up against. But that's the thing, is that I'm like, yeah, it's this one guy. And then I go somewhere else and I'm like, wow, these other guys are just like amazing. I did a commercial in Atlanta, and Atlanta's a big production hub, obviously, but like I had my first union female gaffer ever. And she was like in her 50s, and she was amazing. And she ran her crew like butter. It was like, and everyone loved her, and she did an amazing job. And I had the moment where I literally was like, I've never even met a female gaffer who's made it outside of film school. Like, I don't know one. And I'm looking because I like to employ women, but this was the first one. And it's that side of it is crazy. I mean, because as female DPs and like non-traditional DPs move forward, we don't want to hire the same traditional people that like some guys like, here's my guy, take my guy. Um, it's not cultivated enough yet. But that's why it's so cool to hear that on your set, like a woman looks around and is like, oh, this is amazing. We just need more of that.
Yeah, like I'm not gonna lie. I feel pretentious like saying that comment, because it's like, but it really was a real moment that I was that to this day, like I was like, that was just weird. Like, at first I remember my reaction being like how weird of a question that was, because I didn't even think twice of it or whatever. And it took me like actually some time to be like, oh, she asked me because of that, not because of and then I realized that it was like a much larger issue, that not that I wasn't aware about, I just didn't understand both the complexity and the extent of it.
Mhm.
You know.
Well,
Um,
there are women in documentary film, and there are women in indie film, but getting into advertising and into like bigger narrative stuff, it to fall off is big.
wow. And it's crazy because nowadays we're gonna have to like we have so much more. We need so much more like man I was gonna say manpower, but manpower, female power, like just moving through just to um, the demand of content is crazy. I know it's cliche to say, but it's like start thinking of the amount of networks, the amount of streaming platforms, the amount of
Mhm.
just brands are now spending money. Like brands are spending pretty good money even just to create Instagram campaigns and this. It's like so, you know, there's such a need that I don't even think that the traditional way can I don't think the traditional way of thinking of whether, like the idea of apprenticeship or the idea that that you can't use the full range of humanity's power, like both male and female or anything, just to like get all this content out there, because it's just like we really need to like open up the pipeline and use talent from any and everyone that has a voice and can you know uh share their work, their craft, their talent.
Yeah. I mean, I hope that keeps going. I mean, COVID has got me scared in terms of like what's going to happen to this industry, but that's where we were going. Yeah. Like there's a lot out there and the same voices, it's not the same voices writing. So, and that kind of like, I don't know, it opens it up. And yeah, there's so much of it that I was telling like, a younger DP who's getting frustrated. And I was like, dude, you just keep going. You prove that you can carry a crew. You prove that you can do work on time and that you have talent. And it's just a matter of time before you get a show because there are so many, you know.
And that's like the biggest thing, like even talking to younger people, younger DPs, reminding everyone that there is, you know it's not, everyone wants to say like, this generation, the millennial generation or the younger generation is like has a sense of entitlement and all that. And my whole mentality is I don't, maybe there's that's partially true, but the way I look at it is that this is also a generation that literally has grown up having everything at their fingertips. Like everything is so easily accessible, and
Yeah.
you got to remind them to be great at something. That 10,000 rule, the 10,000 hour rule thing is real, and I always tell people it's very real. Like you just can't turn on talent overnight. You have to just go through the patience of the process, and it's going to take 10 years, it's going to take 15 years sometimes. Like it's just going to. And what's going to happen is that like when you do have like that breakthrough, like you had, and I've had to a certain extent with Merge, it's like it really does happen in a year or two. But you can't get to that point if you don't do the 15 years of paying your dues and dedicating yourself to it. It's just a process.
That's so true. I feel like you should just like hand that out on a piece of paper to everyone because it's like, yeah, it's not the year or two that that like where everyone can see your career evolve. It's the 10 to 15 years before that where you've been ready, getting ready. At 10,000 hours, I mean, I don't know what that amounts to in film time, but like it sounds right, like practice, 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 and get good at your craft because as a DP, you will get fired. That's what happens to DPs on bigger sets. If they don't like, if you're not going fast, if you're not going fast enough, if the crew is not gelled and they look bumbly fumbly, and if you are not delivering what at the level that they expect, they're like, and that's one of the things about being a DP that sucks. They're like, oh, this one doesn't work. Next, and it's unfortunate it works like that, but that's why 10,000 hours, like 10 years, keep working
Yeah.
so you're ready.
So yeah, I think that's actually pretty much everything. But I'll do like a little a wrap up. I think that's a good way. I think excuse me. I think that's a good way to end it for now.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, this thing is like really funny about doing this podcast is that like I'm not a radio show host, and I've been thrown into this super uncomfortable thing, which by the way is incredibly exhilarating,
Mm.
because it's like that fear of like the first few times I went go and DP stuff or shoot stuff, and that to the point where now I'm a little more comfortable, but like there's a certain aspect of fear that I think is like the drug that we can't get enough of. Like I don't know what it's masochistic in many ways. I always joke about it.
Yeah.
Um, but I just wanted to, I want to thank you for, sharing some of the insight of your career, of your mentality, of everything that that you do in Stanford. And I'm honestly looking forward to future collaborations. I mean, I couldn't be in New York, but I know that on future projects we'll definitely do something.
I mean, I would love that. I would love that. Your team's great. I would, yeah, totally. I look forward to it too.
Awesome, Ava. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, and yeah, look forward to seeing all the great things that you continue to do.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, just stay in touch and stay safe.
Awesome. Take care.
All right. Bye,
Bye.
Julie.
Bye.